All raccoons are attracted by shiny objects, and Rascal was no exception. He was fascinated by brass doorknobs, glass marbles, my broken Ingersoll watch, and small coins. I gave him 3 bright pennies, which he hoarded with the happiness of a little miser. He felt them carefully, smelled them, tasted them, and then hid them in a dark corner with some of his other treasures. One day he decided to carry one of his pennies to the back porch. Po the crow was perched on the porch rail, teasing the cats, but keeping just beyond their reach. This raucous old bird, who cawed and cussed in crow language, was arcing his wings and strutting like a pool-room bully as Rascal pushed open the screen and trundled into the sunlight, his penny shining like newly minted gold. Po and Rascal had taken an instant dislike to each other when they first met. Crows, like most other birds, know that raccoons steal birds' eggs and sometimes eat fledglings. In addition, Po was jealous. He had seen me petting and pampering my small raccoon, but Rascal was large enough now to pull a few tail feathers from the big black bird during their noisy squabbles, and Po, who was no fool, was taking few chances. The penny, however, was so tempting that the crow threw caution to the winds and made a dive for the bright object, for crows are as insatiably attracted to glittering objects as are raccoons, and in addition are inveterate thieves. Rascal was carrying the penny in his mouth, and when Po swooped to conquer, his beak closed not only on the penny but upon 6 of Rascal's coarse, strong whiskers. When the black thief tried to make his fast getaway, he found himself attached to the raccoon, who with a high scream of fury began fighting for his property and his life. Such a tangle of shining black feathers and furious fur you have seldom seen, as Rascal and Po wrestled and struggled. I arrived to untangle them, and both were angry with me. Rascal nipped me slightly for the first time, and Po made several ungracious comments. The penny, meanwhile, had rolled from the porch into the grass below, where the crow promptly spotted it, seized it once again, and took wing. Straight as a crow flies, seldom applied to my wily pet. After any thievery, he would travel by devious routes before slipping between the wide slats of the Methodist belfry, where he presumably stored his loot. I gave the incident no more thought, pacified Rascal with another penny, and resumed work on my canoe in the living room. The blueprint I had made in the manual training shop at school called for a trim and streamlined craft, 18 feet long and 28 inches wide. The slender longitudinal ribs were fastened at prow and stern and curved around cross-sectional forms between. These and the inner keel were now in place. But the ribs to encircle the craft from gunwale to gunwale presented a problem. I had tried steaming hickory for this purpose and curving the wood under pressure, but it had given up as an impossible job with my limited equipment. Then a happy thought struck me. Nothing is tougher than the water elm used in making cheese boxes. An additional convenience is the fact that these cylinders of thin wood are already curved into a complete circle. Most of the tradesmen were friends of mine. They bought and tied neatly bundled branches of white-tipped crimson radishes. They bought the neatly tied bunches of white-tipped crimson radishes which I raised in my war garden, and gave me meat scraps and stale loaves for bread for Wowzer. I was sure they would give me some empty cheese boxes if I asked politely. At Pringles they had one good cheese box, and at Wilson's Grocery another. Before I had visited half the food stores in town, I had all I needed. At home in the living room I marked 2-inch strips on each of these cylinders, and with my father's best ripsaw began extracting an exasperating job of cutting the featherweight canoe ribs. Some of the boxes split and were ruined, but with patience I finally sawed the 42 circles that were required. I found, to my great joy, that these strips of wood had no tendency to spread, but on the contrary held their circular shape to perfection. All of this work in the living room created some disorder, particularly when I began sandpapering the ribs, starting with number 2 sandpaper and finishing with 00, which is very fine. The wood smoothed to a satin grain, creamy yellow and pleasant to the touch. I was still sanding the ribs, with Rascal clambering over the unfinished canoe, when a Stutz bearcat curved up the gravel drive. Out stepped my beautiful sister, Theodora Maud from the Tennyson, of course. With her was one of her maids, and Theo had a determined look on her patrician face and a light in her eyes, and went well with the mass of auburn hair. "Theo! Theo!" I shouted happily, running out to embrace her. "Hello, sonny boy. My, you're all covered with sawdust. "Well, you see, Theo, I'm building a canoe." "That's nice, but where?" "In the living room," I said, dropping my eyes. "Merciful heavens," Theo said. "Now help Jenny with the luggage and put it in the downstairs bedroom." I didn't dare tell Theo that I was sleeping in that room and that Rascal slept there too. I loved this sister, but I was slightly in awe of her. She had been kind to me after Mother died, and she would be kind to me again some years later when I was stricken by infantile paralysis. But she was a martinet concerning deportment, dress, housekeeping, and much besides. It was her training that made me jump like the jack-in-the-box whenever an older person, particularly a lady, entered the room. She dressed me on occasion in such fashionable Norfolk suits and jackets that it took several fistfights to prove I was still one of the gang. Theo gave the living room one sweeping glance and raised her hands in horror. "I've never seen such a mess in my life," she said. "I swept up the sawdust and shavings every evening." "Yes, I see them right there in the fireplace. Daddy and I do a good job of batching it," I said defensively. "Batching it? That's just the trouble," Theo said severely. "Now, you must get that canoe out of the living room this minute, Sterling." I had a little of the family's fire, so I replied with a firm and angry refusal. I told Theo we were living exactly the way we wanted to live, and that I would never wear a Norfolk suit or a necktie again, except on Sundays. "You're not too big to spank," Theo said, her loving eyes flashing. "Just try. Now, Sterling, I've brought Jenny to clean this house from top to bottom. I'll cook some decent food. We'll hire a full-time housekeeper, and we'll get this canoe out of the living room." "Can't you just leave us alone?" I said mournfully. "Anyway, you're not my mother." "Oh, sonny boy," she said, sudden contrite and fighting back the tears. She came around the end of the canoe and kissed me quite tenderly. Giving Theo the downstairs bedroom didn't worry me. She always took the big room with the adjoining bath. She said none of the other beds was fit to sleep in. My difficulty would come in trying to explain all this to Rascal. Raccoons have definite patterns in their minds, and Rascal has decisively chosen that same bed that Theo wanted. He preferred a room with a bath. Each evening I closed the drain in the big lavatory and left a few inches of water in the basin so that Rascal could get a drink at any time during the night, or perhaps wash a cricket before he ate it. How was I going to reveal this small creature of habit that he had been evicted? Theo had not seen Rascal until this moment. He had been lying low, watching and listening shrewdly. He may not have been a perfect judge of character, but he reacted with surprising sensitivity to various modulations of voice. He knew when he was being praised or scolded, and when people were feeling affectionate or angry. He didn't altogether trust this auburn-haired stranger, although his eyes strayed off into her shining hair. His virtual invisibility was due to the fact that he was lying on a large jaguar skin rug which Uncle Justice had sent to us from Pará, Brazil. The mounted head had realistic glass eyes which Rascal often fondled and sometimes tried to dislodge. The little raccoon blended perfectly into the handsomely marked pelt of the once ferocious jungle cat. When Rascal began to rise from that skin, like the disembodied spirit of the Amazonian jaguar, it startled Theo nearly out of her wits. "What in the world is that?" "That's Rascal, my good little raccoon." "You mean it lives in the house?" "Only part of the time." "Does it bite?" "Not unless you slap him or scold him. Now get that thing out of here, Sterling." "Well, all right," I agreed reluctantly, knowing that Rascal could let himself back in any time he pleased. Rascal spent the rest of the day sleeping in the oak tree. But that night, when the moon arose, he backed down his tree, patted on the screen door, opened it with ease, and went confidently to our bedroom and crawled in with Miss Theo. My father and I, who were sleeping upstairs, were awakened by a blood-curdling yell. We rushed downstairs in our pajamas to find Theo standing on a chair, treed by a complacent little raccoon who sat on the floor below, blinking up at this crazy human being who was screeching like a fire siren. "He always sleeps in this bed," I explained. "He's harmless and perfectly clean." "You take that horrid little animal out of this house this minute," Theo ordered, "and hook the screen door so it can't possibly get back in." "Well, okay," I said, "but you're sleeping in Rascal's bed, and he has just as many rights around here as you have." "Don't be impertinent," Theo said, reassuming her dignity. A later episode of this visit is worth recalling. Recently married, Theo treasured her engagement ring, a square-cut diamond of perhaps 1 carat, mounted in white gold. She had misplaced this ring on several occasions. Once we dug up 85 feet of sewer, only to find that she had transferred the ring to another purse. True to form, she again lost her ring. She thought she had left it in a wide rim of the lavatory when she went to bed, and that either it had fallen into the drain or had been stolen. No one in Brailsford Junction ever locked his door, not within memory had there been a robbery. We ransacked the house, hunted through the grass and the flower beds, and then made plans for again digging up the sewer. Then a far-fetched possibility struck me like a bolt from the blue. Just before dawn on that fateful morning, I had heard Rascal and Poe having a terrible fight on the back porch. Before I could shake the deep sleep from my eyes, the cawing and the screaming subsided, and I had drowsed off again. Feeling as keen as a Scotland Yard detective, I began to weave a theory. On this fourth night of Theo's visit, I had not hooked the screen door. Rascal apparently had slipped into the house, reached the downstairs bathroom, and wisely chosen not to create another scene. He had decided, however, to take a drink of fresh water from the lavatory, had climbed to the windowsill and then to the basin, and found it empty. But joy of joys, there on the rim of the lavatory was the prettiest object he had ever seen in his life, a big diamond ring gleaming with blue-white radiance in the pre-dawned light. If my theory were sound, Rascal had picked up the ring and taken it to the back porch where Poe the Crow had spotted the treasure. This would explain the crow-raccoon fight which had awakened me. Quite possibly, the black thief had won again, at least in the matter of flying away with the loot. I had asked permission of the kindly Reverend Hooton before starting my dusty climb to the 75-foot belfry. The shaft was dark and filled with cobwebs, and some of the cleats were loose, making me fear I might fall. But having enlisted in this venture, there was no turning back. At long last I reached the airy little room at the top, with its widely spaced shutters, furnishing a view of the town and creek winding toward the river. I stood for a few moments, viewing the world below me. Then I touched the deep-toned bell which had tolled 47 times for my mother, and would one day toll 99 times for my father. Remembering my mission, I began to search the dusty belfry. Behind a pile of discarded hymnals, which some dedicated idiot had lugged to this unlikely storage place, I found a ragged circle of twigs and leaves and black feathers which Poe the Crow called home. As some people keep their money in their mattress, Poe had made his bed even more comfortable with a pile of shining junk which overran the nest and spilled across the floor. Here were glasses and steelies and a real agate marble, all of which had been stolen during our marble games. Here was my football whistle snatched while he hovered just over the line of scrimmage, shouting, "What fun! What fun!" Here were scraps of sheet copper, a second key to our old Oldsmobile, and wonder of wonders, Theo's diamond ring. Poe dropped it about this time, and he didn't say, "What fun!" He wouldn't let me pet him, and he called and swore at me as though I were a thief and he were an honest householder. I put several of the stolen objects into my pocket, my best marbles, the second key to our car, my football whistle, and Theo's ring, of course. But I left many of the shiny trinkets, knowing Poe couldn't tell the sheet copper from a diamond ring. The crow's raucous criticism followed me all the way down the shaft and out into the sunlight. Theo was so pleased at my recovery of her ring that she did not insist on the removal of my canoe from the living room, and she postponed the decision concerning a full-time housekeeper. She merely fed us delightful meals and, with Jenny's help, left the house shining clean from fresh curtains at the windows. Then, with a goodbye kiss and a wave of her hand, she was off again, gallant and beautiful, brave and temperamental, and now no more.